Welcome, Dolphins fans, haters, and everyone in between to your favorite show discussing the greatest franchise in sports, the Miami Dolphins. This is the PhinsPod. My name is Moose, your host, and it's time to really analyze the Miami Dolphins roster, what position group shined and led the way to 10 victories this past season, and which position group struggled as a whole. This way, when we finish today's episode, we're going to know exactly which areas need to be improved upon this offseason. Remember, March comes free agency, April comes the draft, and then we get full gear into season number 3 with Brian Flores. In this episode, we're going to specifically tackle the offensive side of the ball. Then we're going to hit the defensive side of the ball in a follow-up show later this week, so be sure to stay tuned. We're going to talk about all that, all the roster, the receivers, the running backs, quarterback play, and as always, be sure to take a moment and hit that subscribe button wherever it is you're listening. Follow us if you're listening on Spotify, and make sure you're connecting with us on all platforms just to make sure you never miss a thing. All right, baby, let's dive in.
On the hop, let's go! Know where we're going, know where you're going, on the hop. Know where you're going and be on the hop. Let's go, keep it going, ho. Keep the pressure on them. Keep the pressure on them. What are we going to do, D? What are we going to do, defense?
For the Miami Dolphins, under the leadership of Brian Flores.
Take it. We're competing now. We're competing now. Here we go.
Going into the season, expectations were tempered as Miami was in the midst of a roster rebuild.
Just keep playing, fellas. Hey, just keep playing. Just keep playing.
With a cast of young talent and unsung heroes, the Dolphins exceeded expectations.
All right, so we're going to start this off focusing on, of course, the sexiest position group, the one everyone cares about, quarterbacks. For the Dolphins, obviously, the number one quarterback was Tua Tagovailoa. He finished the season with a 64% completion percentage, 1,814 yards in 9 games, 11 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 3 of which did come in that Week 17 performance against the Buffalo Bills. And he ended up averaging 6.3 yards per attempt. So definitely not what you want to see in terms of, permanent career stats. In his first year, considering the weaponry, again, which we're going to get into, 6.3 yards per attempt was his average. Ryan Fitzpatrick averaged 68.5% as a completion percentage with 2,091 yards, 13 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. He had a higher yards per attempt average by a couple yards, which again makes sense as he was more prone to pushing it down the field. He also did have a higher interception rate, but again, for Ryan Fitzpatrick, compared to other stops in his career, not nearly as bad as you would expect to see from him this season. So the quarterback position, is it a need or are we good? Well, look, it's a need because Ryan Fitzpatrick is likely not coming back to the Dolphins. Obviously, considering where he is in his career, where the Dolphins are as a franchise, and sort of the rumblings that the national media would make if Fitzpatrick came back regarding a potential quarterback controversy. Considering we know the direction the team wants to head in, and it's a direction, frankly, that I think most fans are comfortable with, I don't believe Miami's going to be bringing back Ryan Fitzpatrick, and for that reason, Miami must invest in a good quality backup. Currently, they have quarterbacks like Jake Rudock, who's been in the system. He's worked with Brian Flores. Obviously, when I say system, I don't mean the offensive system, and the type of play calling that will be brought in. That is going to be new and sort of a hybrid of various offenses over the last couple of years. No, when I say system, I mean culture, day-to-day operations, understanding the way in which the Dolphins as a franchise work. So then they also have Reed Sinnett, who came in, remember, towards the end. He was the backup in case anything went wrong in Buffalo at the end of the year. So, Miami may look to add a veteran backup for Tua. It would make sense. Still young, and it's really smart to add good depth and mentorship for Tua, who is, again, not only young, but still in his development process and could really, lean on a veteran through the rigors of an overall 17-game season. They could also look in the draft, but that's not as likely considering that there are other holes on the team, and addressing backup quarterback in the draft is usually a good idea when you have an established guy and you have time to sort of develop someone behind the ranks. And, if we do draft someone, although that wouldn't be the worst, if Tua did go down with an injury, and your fourth round quarterback who you drafted as a potential, grooming prospect, someone who could be a consistent backup, the guy who ideally becomes your Matt Moore, but maybe he's not ready. And now your season's tanked because Tua's out for 6 weeks, and this backup rookie's not ready. So some options to consider out there on free agency. Jacoby Brissett, familiar with sort of the New England scheme, sort of fits and plays the way Tua does, a little bit mobile, but really a pocket passer at heart. And I definitely think he's, his veteran leadership and presence and, his history being a good teammate is something that, the Dolphins would covet. He might be on the pricier end because, again, he still might want to look for a position to start. So I don't know if the Dolphins are really a place for him. There's also quarterbacks like Colt McCoy, really seasoned veteran guys. You know exactly what you're going to get. Similar to a Ryan Fitzpatrick, with McCoy, you don't nearly have those highs as when as you do with Fitzy, but you also don't have some of those lows. And then, of course, we can take Justin Herbert. He's always going to make an appearance, I guess, unfortunately, on the PhinsPod. Justin Herbert's backup quarterback, Tyrod Taylor, last year. Definitely someone the Dolphins have kicked the tires on before, so it would make a lot of sense for them to pursue Tyrod Taylor. Moving on to the running back position. The Dolphins' leading rushers were Myles Gaskin. He appeared in 10 games, running for 584 yards with a 4.1 yard per carry average and having 3 touchdowns on the ground. The second leading rusher was someone who no one knew coming into the season, except maybe some very, very obscure draft analysts, guys who really dive in deep and look into the weeds when it comes to potential prospects. But an undrafted free agent leads the team, or second in the team, on rushing with Salvon Ahmed in 6 games, rushed for 319 yards with 4.3 yards per carry. Again, he did show some flashes, someone that the Dolphins might bring into camp, someone not worth giving up on, potentially signing him to an extension as a cheap guy, young guy, twitchy guy. 3 touchdowns in just 6 games, so definitely some promise there. Matt Breida appeared in 12 games for the Dolphins, rushing for only 254 yards, 4.3 yards per carry, and no touchdowns. And, of course, the Dolphins added DeAndre Washington, a running back previously with the Kansas City Chiefs, via a trade. They gave up a mid to late round asset in order to acquire DeAndre Washington. In 4 games, he just averaged 90. He got 91 yards, just averaging 2.9 yards per carry with 0 touchdowns. Now, Miami did give up assets, so he might be invited back to camp. But based on what he was given some reps, he was given some opportunity, and based on what we saw, he didn't seem to take advantage in the same way that a guy like Salvon Ahmed did. So I would not expect DeAndre Washington to necessarily be a part of the future plans, despite Miami having given up assets to acquire him. But again, contextually speaking, at that point in time, Matt Breida was injured, Jordan Howard was not really a fit, the Dolphins were desperate, and Myles Gaskin was out as well. The Dolphins were really desperate to add some depth at the running back position. So based on where the team was in the season, if we made the playoffs and that was a move that helped, no one's going to question it. So, of course, shit happens. And then, of course, wrapping it up, Patrick Laird, everyone's favorite. These numbers are actually kind of surprising. So he appeared in all 16 games, so Mr. Reliable there. Just 72 yards, so, overall 5th on the team in rushing. 5.5 yards per carry. So when he was given the ball, most of the time, though, he did get the ball when the Dolphins were kind of winning by a lot. But if you go back and think about some games, I want to say it was the Cardinals game, but there were some games where you saw Laird in the end kind of close it out and really earn some tough yardage. I know in the Cardinals game, he was huge at the end of the first half in that drive, getting some, not fumbling that handoff. That was almost a huge mistake there. And obviously getting that receiving pass that put them in position for Jason Sanders to really sneak it through. So Laird offers some, potential upside, but again, I feel like his upside is limited, so I don't really know if Laird's someone you want to bring back. So looking forward, is the running back position a need, or are we good here? It's clear. It's a need. Miami must add some talent to this group. Myles Gaskin would be a great number 2. I think the fact, he was number 1 and he played well. No ill will towards Myles Gaskin. No, doubt in his play style. I think he really impressed, and I think he can play even better going forward. But I think the way he plays, he'd be an excellent complementary back. And if Miami were able to add a workhorse to the rotation to help boost the running game, someone like Aaron Jones might be expensive, and Miami may look to add some cheaper options, but those options would really help open things up offensively. And again, take the burden off of Tua to really make plays on a consistent basis and help plays kind of be made because of the weapons around him, and allow him to be a point guard, allow him to be that type of quarterback who dices defenses up, takes advantage, and manipulates based on what the game plan has been and based on, where the team is in the flow of the game. If you're winning by a lot, It's a lot easier to take those shots and, kill opponents when you're up by 2 scores and then make it the fourth quarter an easy game. That's the type of team we want the Dolphins to be. We want the defense to be holding the opposing offense, and you want our offense to be putting up points so that way when it comes crunch time, the Dolphins can just separate and then they can win easily. When was the last time you expected the Dolphins to win week in and week out? It hasn't been the case. As a young Dolphins fan, I never had the audacity to really expect a season. Obviously we had hope, but you don't expect wins that way. If you build a consistent winner, if that becomes the norm, one, that's how you actually remain competitive and become a dynasty level type, team in the NFL, which again is the ultimate goal here. And, based on the Dolphins' assets, what they, aspire to become. So that's the standard we're going to hold them to. And in order for them to do that, you need to create weapons and you need to create a running game. So they might look to do that in the draft as well. And a lot of people have that as the likeliest scenario because, again, signing a running back, especially someone entering their second contract, it's going to be a little more expensive than you would like to give that position. So drafting a Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, or either of the boys from UNC would not be a bad move for the Dolphins to address that running back position based on the output in 2020. So probably the spot that everyone knows is going to be the most needed to address, the wide receiver position. The Dolphins have some players who offered flashes and sparks, and objectively, based on their skill set, you would really hope could blossom. But none of these players really developed. And again, the jury's still out on a few. The Dolphins are going to bring a few of these guys back, but do expect a lot of change to the room. And so let's look at that room. Obviously, it's led by Devontae Parker. Career resurgence a couple years ago showed that he can be a, number 1, number 2 realistically type of receiver, at least an outside guy, someone who can take over a game when the matchup is right. So in 14 games, again, we're used to him missing, 6, 7 plus games. So the fact that he only missed 3 and he really toughened through some games is a good sign, especially, 2 years in a row now that he's been able to play most of the games in a season. So in 14 games, 63 receptions, 793 yards, 4 touchdowns with a 12.6 yards per catch average. Second, Jakeem Grant also appeared in 14 games, 36 receptions, 373 yards, 1 touchdown, 10.4 yards per carry. So again, we're talking receivers, wide receivers specifically. With Mike Gesicki's out of the picture, you see how the numbers sort of change there when you actually just look at the wide receivers? Because I think Mike Gesicki, because he's considered like a receiver, people really, Tua's got weapons. You got Gesicki, he's one of the best young tight ends. Agreed. But the outside guys are huge, especially in creating opportunities for the tight end through spacing and through route combinations, but vice versa, right? So when you have Devontae Parker at your outside, 14 games, 63 receptions, almost 800 yards, 4 touchdowns, that's good. But then your second receiver, 14 games, same amount of games, almost half the receptions, 36 receptions, almost half the yards, 373, 1 touchdown, but again, 10.4 yards per carry. So yards per catch. Now, the fact that that's also a high number, 10.4 yards per catch, I think, and Tua's yards per attempt was so low, you can kind of point to that. And obviously people will say, well, it's because he doesn't throw it down the field, and Fitzpatrick did. It's not that simple. It's not that simple because Fitzpatrick didn't really throw it down the field in the sense of it was because that's what the defense was giving him. He was making plays based on guesses, based on he knew, well, look, I've been in the system for years. I know that we just called this play. Based on where we are in the game, based on the situation, I know that the defense is running a cover 2 or defense is running, cover 0. They're going to blitz. There's actually that corner is showing, but he's not blitzing. He's going to be a spy. Whatever it is that Ryan Fitzpatrick notices, he then will know based on the alignment where he needs to bring the ball. Same reason Brady is where he is right now because he's been in the same system for so long. The same reason that veteran quarterbacks are able to go in there, and even a guy like Chad Henne, who hasn't played in years, can go in the playoffs because he just knows, where is my out? Where do I need to put the ball? Now, Fitzpatrick had, gunslinger attitude, and of course, again, great for the Dolphins. But for a guy like Tua, early in the development of and again, being in an offense not even made for him yet. We have yet to even see that. So in an offense like that, of course, you're going to struggle to find guys, especially when your second best receiver is Jakeem Grant, who also happens to be half the size of an already small quarterback. Number 3, almost gets worse. Mac Hollins appeared in 16 games, had 16 receptions, 176 yards with 1 touchdown, averaging 11 yards per catch. Again, aside from him being amazing for us in that Raiders game, Mac Hollins is not someone you want to be a legitimate receiver. He is a special teams ace. He's someone you want on your team as that 6th, 7th wide receiver who you might need in a pinch because he's fine to have there, but you don't want him starting for you. And he was starting games, meaningful games for the Miami Dolphins last season. Lynn Bowden Jr. comes on the list next in 10 games, 28 receptions, 211 yards, no touchdowns with 7.5 yards per catch. Lynn Bowden Jr. of all the receivers is by far the most intriguing prospect. Remember, came out of Kentucky, played at the SEC, and was used as a wildcat gadget-style quarterback, similar to Malcolm Perry. However, rather than that Navy offense, the way it's really done in that sort of old-school pistol formation exclusively, running the read option exclusively through the old-school style football that they run in those Navy Army games, Lynn Bowden played a little bit more of a spread-out wildcat attack, something more translatable to the NFL, which is why I think, aside from, of course, the physical skill set advantages that Lynn Bowden has over Malcolm Perry, I just mean in terms of an understanding of the NFL. I think that's why we saw Lynn Bowden transition with a lot more ease than Malcolm Perry, who hopefully we'll get to see get a shot to really make a showing of himself in the preseason and maybe get a chance to crack the roster. But again, he doesn't even make the list as we're going to go through the more receivers because he just was not really an option or not really a presence. Again, but he is a 7th-round pick rookie, so give him time. But going back to Lynn Bowden, he did flash some of those skill sets in between defenders, being able to make guys miss in the open field, someone who can make that 4-yard out pass a 12-yard gain through just one simple move. So Lynn Bowden definitely showed some intriguing promise, and I fully expect him to come back. He definitely was building a good rapport with Tua Tagovailoa. And hey, once he took that 15, I was like, wait, I thought that was Albert Wilson's number. But once he took 15, I don't think he's letting that go. I have a feeling the Dolphins are going to use him to sort of replace Albert Wilson as well. Now, one of the more intriguing receivers, Preston Williams. In 8 games, clearly when Tua came in, him and Preston Williams had a connection, especially in the first half of that Arizona game. It's clear that he's someone that has that potential, of course, but it's been 2 seasons now. He's ended the season on IR both times. He had 18 receptions, 288 yards, but 4 touchdowns in 8 games. So that's why he's so impressive. He puts the ball in the end zone. He's a red zone threat. He's someone you can rely on to put it up there because he's got a big body and also happens to be kind of a crazy good athlete and very quick in the open field. So Preston Williams will be coming back. Now, he was being given that number 2 role next to Devontae Parker. Maybe that changes. Maybe he's really going to have to compete for that. And hopefully the Dolphins bring in some competition where he doesn't, if he becomes that number 2 receiver again next year, I want him to have earned that and to know that that's something that we can be excited about and it's not out of necessity. And then the last receiver we're going to touch on, Isaiah Ford, who I love, obviously, personally, 7th-round pick, great story, chain converter for the Dolphins. For me, forever a legend for his performance in Week 17 in 2019 against the Patriots. Well, that might have been 2020 at that point in time. But against the Patriots in Week 17, Isaiah Ford was huge. This season helped us again against the Patriots when we traded him away for I believe a 7th-round pick, which we will get to use this draft. But then it just didn't work, I guess, in New England, and we got him right back and then got to use him against the Patriots. So that was great. But I highly doubt he's someone who comes back for the team. But in 10 games for the Dolphins, he had 28 receptions, 276 yards, and no touchdowns with 9.9 yards per catch. So, like we said, is this a need? Of course. We've been talking about it this entire time. Miami generally needs to overhaul the unit. They have good options on the outside, like we said, with Preston Williams and Devontae Parker, but there's not a lot of diversity in the receiver room. Aside from a guy like Lynn Bowden, there's no true slot wideout, and you wanted a guy, Jakeem Grant, to become that shifty, so quick. If he can, make a guy miss within a 5-yard window, he'll be gone on a quick slant route. That's a perfect guy for Tua, but just something never really fit, and he's getting paid a good amount. So Miami's likely going to draft and sign some more talent to really bolster the room come this offseason in 2021. Moving on to the tight end position. So this is something that, a lot of people had questions going into the 2020 season, but they were answered by at least Mike Gesicki. Mike Gesicki really showed that he can develop into one of the more dominant tight ends in the NFL. be the player that he was coming out of Penn State, or at least the projected hope. Because in college, he played this role. He was the jump ball guy, red zone threat, kind of that weird athlete where who are you going to put on a guy like him? You need a Derwin James type, really, a lanky, tall, athletic freak who can also go up and jump and fight for that, that pass 30 yards down the field. Because Mike Gesicki showed this year, regardless of what you want to say about, him as a blocker, his toughness, he showed out. He's one of the toughest sons of bitches on the Dolphins. So kudos to Mike Gesicki for fighting through that pain and really being there when the Dolphins needed him the most. So that was really good to see in terms of toughness. And also in terms of his hands. He does not drop things. When they get into his hands, he is going to catch them. So in 15 games, Mike Gesicki had 53 receptions for 700 yards, 6 touchdowns, averaging 13.3 yards per catch. That's great. And you want to see that development continue and that rapport with Tua Tagovailoa continue to grow as well. The second level tight end was 15 games played was Durham Smythe, 26 receptions with 200 yards for 2 touchdowns, 8 yards per catch. Durham Smythe kind of impressed. Again, you coming out of Notre Dame, he was considered more so a prospect for blocking. The goal was he could become an Anthony Fasano type if he bulked up. He didn't really bulk up. He's still kind of slim, but he's smart. He knows what to do. He doesn't really mess up. He does mess up in blocking occasionally. He can be a liability. So Miami may look to upgrade there. But in terms of what you got out of him, not bad. Not bad, especially at the tight end position where it's hard to find valuable depth. And that's where the next guy comes into play, Adam Shaheen. Similar to Durham Smythe, he didn't make a huge impact, but it was year 1 with the Dolphins regime while Durham Smythe has been here the whole time, similar to Gesicki. And Shaheen really showed some flashes. He had moments of like, whoa, if he puts it together, I could see him being pretty impactful, especially in a 2 tight end set with a guy like Gesicki. So in 16 games played, Shaheen, 12 receptions, 150 yards, and the best part, 3 touchdowns. So yes, in 16 games, he only had 3 touchdowns, but when you compare him to the other tight ends, and especially compared to his overall usage, good number to see. And he averaged 12.5 yards per reception as well. Is tight end a need going forward based on what we saw last year? I don't believe it to be a major need. Miami has decent depth with Shaheen and Smythe, and if Gesicki continues, his growth and stays healthy, the Dolphins are set. Now, I'm a big fan of adding another premier tight end always to run multiple tight end sets. So you could see the Dolphins add someone in the draft. Look, if a Kyle Pitts falls to them, at 18, I highly doubt it. But if Kyle Pitts falls or Miami's able to add a guy who, in terms of value, can help in the run game and can be a red zone threat and can kind of potentially replace either Smythe or Shaheen, my money would be on Smythe, then why say no to that? But is it a pressing need? Is it something where if they don't address, they're screwed? No, it's not, especially when you compare it to the receiver position that we just spoke about. And lastly, we're going to get to the big uglies. Obviously, saved them for last. 1, because they're most important. And 2, because if you're still listening, 1, thank you so much. Please hit subscribe. But you guys are, the best fans, the best supporters, the reason that we keep producing these episodes. So thank you so much for continuing to listen. The other reason we saved them for last is because, frankly, they're the most boring to talk about. But we're going to address them. Austin Jackson came in as a rookie last year and played in 13 games. He had 848 snaps, 5 penalties, and 4 sacks allowed. All right, so it's important. Try to remember these numbers. That's a pretty high number when we're going to be looking at the rest of the offensive linemen. Obviously, Robert Hunt is sort of up there as well. No surprise, the rookie struggled with allowing more sacks and kind of causing more penalties when compared to the veterans. But it's definitely going to be intriguing to see if these numbers are reduced or if the Dolphins look to replace any of these rookies despite having some promising years. But if there's one thing we do know about Flores and his overall regime, it's that even if you do play all right, they're not going to rely on that. They'll replace Michael Dieter. He didn't play well at all. He didn't, but it wasn't bad enough where you would think that they would invest as much as they did. But the fact that they did showed that they're not going to settle, and that's great. So some of these numbers, a little bit concerning. So like we said, 5 penalties and 4 sacks for him. For Eric Flowers, comparatively, only 3 penalties, but he allowed 5 sacks in 14 games played. So Eric Flowers is someone Miami might try to upgrade, especially considering his cost. But again, he isn't necessarily a horrible person to have at left guard. He did provide some good overall solid play. But again, always improvement, especially on the interior of that line for Tua. Speaking of improvement on the interior of the line, Solomon Kindley, a rookie that the Dolphins moved up to acquire, played in 13 games, 747 snaps with 5 penalties and 4 sacks. So similar to Austin Jackson, allowing 5 penalties and 4 sacks. Not ideal, especially in terms of penalties, but sacks is something you would expect to improve. Ted Karras seemingly had some of the best performances on the offensive line. Played in all 16 games. I'm pretty sure played in almost every single snap. 1,068 with 3 penalties and 2 sacks allowed. So Ted Karras is likely someone they will want to bring back just because he was reliable, and finding reliable play is hard enough on the offensive line. So it's not great to just let that walk for nothing. And then Jesse Davis, who, even though, Dolphins Nation and me personally have always felt like, man, move on from Jesse Davis. Like, he isn't the guy. He's just someone you've used as a stopgap replacement for years now. But there's a reason for that. I think each regime comes in and they see, well, why would we give up on a guy like this? He gives us exactly what we need. Yeah, he might not be physically the most gifted where he can match up with every single defender, but he'll give him a good fight. And if he's going to go up against, someone of his skill set or worse, he'll handle him. 16 games played, Jesse Davis was used all across the line. 1,055 snaps, so similar to Ted Karras, he played a lot for the Dolphins offense, and he only had 2 penalties all season and only allowed 1 sack. So, based on the eye test, it doesn't feel like Jesse Davis does that well, but when you look at the numbers, he does perform pretty admirably. So maybe he isn't the problem, and the fact that they're putting him in problem spots is because they're like, hey, we have a weakness here. We're going to put you next to that weakness to help hide it a little bit. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he's being helped out by they put him next to the best players, and so that's why his numbers are good. So we don't know. We're going to find out what the team really thinks, but Jesse Davis's numbers are surprisingly good. And then the other rookie who physically, in terms of upside and what you hope he can be, Robert Hunt, it's very exciting, but in 16 games played, he started 11 of them. He played in 700 snaps with 8 penalties and 3 sacks allowed. So that was Robert Hunt's issue. The good thing is penalties is a discipline issue. Obviously, it depends if it's false start type penalties or holding. Sometimes if you hold a lot, it's just because you can't hang. So that's a problem. But Robert Hunt played a lot at right tackle. If Miami does go tackle early in the draft and sort of kick someone out to the right side, maybe you do see Hunt go in onto the interior, which might be better if holding is his issue. So is the offensive line in need? Definitely, as we spoke about. Obviously, we want to see growth and development from our rookies in Austin Jackson, Robert Hunt, and Solomon Kindley. Assuming that growth, the line will be much better shape, just regardless of if they add talent or not, because they're going to have the same players last year, but those rookies inevitably are going to get better in their second year. That generally is the trend that you see for offensive linemen, especially when you compare it to other positions where maybe a running back, a great rookie running back, has a sophomore slump. Usually offensive linemen with one more year of physical growth and development. It's just a position that requires so much with age and strength and bone structure and density and muscle mass that the older you are, as long as you're still in your physical prime, it's beneficial to you. So Austin Jackson, remember, he was hella young when we drafted him. He was 20 years old. So he's only going to get bigger, stronger, faster, and more agile. So hopefully that improvement, we see that happen. But the Dolphins do need to get stronger on the interior of the offensive line. They need to build Tagovailoa a wall that he can stand behind and surgically break down defenses the way that his skill set would make him the best, is if he sits there and dices you up, and he needs a wall to do that and to be his best, similar to what he had at Alabama. And you saw what he produced. So give him the opportunity to do that for you. He needs time to take those shots. So having that improved wall will be pivotal to the offense's overall success in 2021. The other place Miami will look to improve the line will be in the draft. There are plenty of cheap options available. Miami could look to add depth in the middle rounds of the draft. And look, they were able to find a guy like Solomon Kindley in the 4th round. That's awesome. The fact that they were able to get someone who started 12 games for them in the 4th round. So there are options, and Miami has a lot of picks in the top 50, let alone the 4th round. So they could absolutely address some of these spots on the line. Okay, so now that we've gone through each position on the offensive side of the football and done a brief assessment of how things currently stand, how do we rank the positions of need for Miami's offense going into the offseason? And for me, it's clear. Miami's number one need is at the wide receiver position. The team was weakest there by the end of the season, and there is no way to see, what Tua can truly be at his best without that support from the wideout position, as we just spoke about. And that's not a surprise. There's a reason that every single mock draft has either Devonta Smith or Jamar Chase, hell, Jalen Waddle coming to the Fins. Second, I would say in terms of need is the offensive line. Similar to wideout, Tua needs to be supported by a stout offensive line, which will give him time to read the field and create holes for the running game as well in terms of a line. And you want a strong, powerful identity in the run game to help, again, everything else flow better. And specifically, we want the Dolphins to focus on the center and guard position because, again, they have some young tackles who are developmental, as well as some good depth pieces like Jesse Davis. Then I would say as the third need, running back. That's clear. And this is probably the last kind of serious need that Miami should really address. Miami struggled to find any consistency, even with the emergence of Myles Gaskin. So that would be the third need. Again, right now we're at wide receiver first, then offensive line, and then running back. I would say at 4, it would be quarterback. Having a reliable backup for Tua, both in terms of his development mentally, but also for the team in case Tua suffers an injury. Again, I've said this before, it would be negligent for the franchise to not bring in someone in case Tua suffers an injury. It is a realistic possibility. None of us want it to be the case. Knock on wood, of course. But again, you have to be smart, especially when you're running a franchise that is at the cusp of potential, greatness. And Miami's too good to let that one injury, even a quarterback, Miami's too good to let that one injury derail that entire season and all the work they've put in at all these other positions that are very important, if not equally important. So expect them to invest in a solid backup until Tua takes full control of the offense. Can I hear Brian Hoyer? The position that needs the least attention is tight end. Miami has 3 young weapons, as we spoke about, who all contributed last season in Gesicki, Smythe, and Shaheen. So that means Miami must address the wide receiver position first, the offensive line second. No shocks there. I'm not reinventing the wheel here. But it's good to go back and look at what Miami has and really see how far away they are. They do have some pieces that you hope develop and get better and grow, but there are some places that really could use an infusion of talent, like running back. And, of course, the last 2 spots with quarterback depth and the tight ends not as important.
Under the leadership of Coach Flores, Miami is building something special.
Win on 3, win on me, 1, 2, 3, win.
With all the progress and the promise tomorrow holds, for the Miami Dolphins, just the beginning.
Thank you guys so much for listening. That's going to do it for us here today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the PhinsPod. As always, we'll still be looking on the defensive side of the ball next week. We're not done with the roster breakdown. And then we're going to be looking ahead at some prospects, both on the offensive side of the ball as well as defensively, who might be perfect fits for Miami. Please remember to subscribe to the show as well, wherever it is that you listen, just to never miss a chance to chat about your favorite team, the Miami Dolphins. The show itself is available on all platforms: Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, as well as YouTube. Please subscribe there as well. If you're listening right now on YouTube, hit it. It's right there. You've been listening for 30 minutes. I don't know why you haven't. And continue the conversation on Twitter and Instagram at PhinsPod. Check out the site for news and content, PhinsPod.com, as well as our TikTok at PhinsPod. There is so much trash talk from opposing fan bases on TikTok. I can't get to it all. I love your support. I'd love you to enter the comments there and fight some battles for me. But other than that, I hope you have an amazing day. And until next time, stay safe. Love y'all.